Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to this seminar on a Friday afternoon. I'm really, really delighted to welcome George Ploubidis. Sorry, George. You say it.
Well, Ploubidis.
Thank you. Anyway, I've known George a long time, and George is a professor of population health and statistics at UCL Social Research Institute, and currently he holds the post of principal investigator of the National Child Development Study, which is a cohort born in 1958, and also, because that's not enough, the 1970 British cohort study, and both of those are held at the Centre for Longitudinal Studies. Prior to joining UCL, George was at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and then before that at the University of Cambridge. And he describes himself as a multidisciplinary quantitative social scientist and a longitudinal population surveys methodologist, which I think is a lovely description, actually. might steal some of that, not the methodology bit, but the multidisciplinary quantitative. And whose main research interests relate to socio-economic and demographic determinants of health over the life course and the mechanisms that underlie generational differences in health and mortality. And his methodological work in longitudinal surveys focuses on applications for handling missing data, causal inference, and measurement error. So I'm going to hand over to George in a moment, but first of all, welcome to everyone. I can see colleagues from a number of different faculties across the university, including the Faculty of Medicine. So thank you for travelling all the way up to Highfield for this. It's a real pleasure to have you, George. You've brought many, many different people together in the room here at Highfield, and we also now, we're over 20 when I last looked online. So lots of interest. It's now over 40 now, over 40, and the number is growing. So thank you, George.
Thank you so much, Jane. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you all for being here, and thank you everybody online. It's a Friday afternoon. I'll do my best to entertain you. I'll do my best. Hopefully, it will go well and so on. So, when I got the invitation, I thought, okay, what would be the best thing to talk about, right, and make it interesting on a Friday as well. And I thought, okay, I think it's very good timing because this is a very exciting new era for BCSM and NCDS, the two cohorts that I direct, but also generally for the British cohorts. And it's an exciting new era because we're kind of, we have 3 studies above the age of 50, so kind of very relevant for work in population aging as we speak now, but also in the future. So, we'll make it work. Yeah. Now we won't have to click on it. So, what I'm going to talk about today, I thought it's a good idea to, I know various colleagues in the room are very familiar with the British birth cohorts, but I thought a good idea to also perhaps remind you also colleagues that are not familiar with them, talk a little bit about the data, which I think is very important, and how this data allow for the cross-generational life course approach to healthy and inclusive aging. So that I think is kind of the main focus of the talk today. There are many research examples that we have given based on this very rich data, but I will focus on the generational health drift, which we believe is a very important population trend, where the cohorts have a very unique role, first of all, documenting this with some empirical evidence, and of course, going further than that, understanding its antecedents, why it's happening, and consequences. I will spend a bit of time discussing health inequalities over the life course. It's one of the areas, of course, where the cohorts, generally all cohorts do very well, with very refined lifelong data on various indicators of inequalities, socioeconomic and otherwise, but also because health inequalities are implied, in a sense, a necessary condition if we want to reverse the generational health drift and achieve healthy and inclusive, and important aging in the 21st century and beyond. So, I work at a place called the Center for Longitudinal Studies, CLS. The highlighted cohorts, these are our core studies. The National Child Development Study, 1958, about 18,000 participants, baby boomers, born in 1958, 1970, British cohort study, BC70, Generation X, similar sample size, born in 1970. Next steps, not a birth cohort, but a cohort in England of people born in the late 90s. And of course, the Millennium Cohort Study, what used to be the youngest of the national cohorts, but as you can see, with the red lines over there, with the red bars over there are some cohorts in a wider family. The youngest cohort, Cosmo, not a birth cohort, but a cohort of adolescents started during the pandemic, and the two new birth cohorts. And with a very exciting development, the early life cohort, which is now a feasibility study, and we hope that this will not be a feasibility study, but this will be the UK-wide new birth cohort. Of course, last but not least, the first, the cohort that started it all, right? The 1946 British birth cohort, also hosted at UCL, and also part of the wider CLS family. We're working very closely with the PI, George Ploubidis, and of the 1946, and the Latvia Enabling Center. I couldn't resist including something of Alexis, you know, the demographers in the room, right? And you know, multidisciplinary computational scientists, maybe it's a long way to say, hey, I identify as a demographer, right? Yeah, I'm definitely a demographer. And most of the world will come from a demographer. Absolutely. So what you see there is you see those 5 of those cohorts, the ones that are focusing mostly today. MCS, age and calendar year, the dots there represent the major sweeps, the major surveys we do, where we collect data. Usually those are like interviews, 90 minutes, 70, 90 minutes, and so on, lots of data being collected, but you see how these cohorts travel through time, in parallel, and so on. Obviously, this data do allow for the life course perspective. Life course theory is very important, very interesting, from various disciplines, sociology, psychology, more recently epidemiology. But in order to actually embark into such research, we need data. We happen to have a lot of this data. Okay, we're lucky. This is the only place on the planet where we have this series of birth cohorts with such rich data. So yes, life course perspective. Now, of course, when it comes to aging, why that matters, obviously, to understand the present, we need to look in the past. It's very well established how various stages of the life course matter across a lifetime, not just early years, but various other stages, transitions, and so on. And I think today I will give you some examples of the kind of questions related to healthy aging and aging research generally we can answer with this data within a cross-generation and life course perspective. What I think is quite important and sometimes neglected when we think about cohorts, because usually we think about cohorts, great, life course. I'm doing some analysis on a single cohort, which is great, but this series of cohorts allow for much more analysis and very deep understanding with individual level data of macrosocial trends. You can see that these cohorts, as they travel through time, with different historical contexts, different experiences, different population shocks, perhaps, and so on. So, with a series of cohorts, there is a great opportunity there to empirically understand and estimate and analyze the impact of macrosocial trends on people's lives across the life course, but also by understanding differences or similarities across these generations, understand, perhaps project future population important macrosocial trends. And this is a unique aspect of the design of the series of British birth cohorts. There is work on that, but I think it's maybe one of the areas where it's a bit neglected, let's say. Because when people think about cohorts, they think about individual level questions and answers, you know, or research type of questions as well. The series of cohorts allow for aggregation of micro and macro, which personally I find quite fascinating. That's a great feature of this design. Various cohorts there. We hope that this will not be a feasibility study. We can even do it will be the new, hopefully the new UK-wide cohort. Now, in terms of data, these studies are very rich. These are just some examples of what data we have in birth, school years, and adulthood. These are lifelong data. The examples there are data from the surveys, mostly, but these are not just surveys, we go more than that. Aside, of course, of the health, social, and other factors, we have to give an example which I think is very important for, will become now very important now that 3 of those cohorts are above the age of 50, and you can do research on aging as we speak, but also in the future. For example, cognitive function. These are, I think, the only studies on the planet that have representative samples with cognitive function data available throughout the life course. And it's not just one of them, as we speak, there are 3, and there will be more in the future. So that lot of opportunities there for work-related, let's think of dementia and so on. Just as an example of work-related dementia. However, these are not just surveys, they go beyond that. I know this is a word salad, but the reason I included this is that actually all of those things, all of this data are available in the cohorts. And they're not just surveys. For example, we have biomarkers at specific life stages. These biomarkers may include, for example, biomarkers of cardiometabolic risk. We also have epigenetic data. So if you're interested in aging research and you want to calculate epigenetic clocks, yes, you can do that, for example. And of course, very, very refined data on employment histories, families, and so on, family structure, and so on. Very, very rich data, very multidisciplinary. It's not, it's a very broad church, let's say, and we have this data available. A very recent, something that happened very recently, is that these cohorts are now fully linked with electronic health records. There are various ways you can get this data, but the UK longitudinal linkage collaboration is one of them. So all these cohorts are now also linked with electronic health records as another new development. And what is in the cards is that within UKLHC, which is unprecedented, we will have available data from the Department of Work and Pensions. So you will have DWP linked data, electronic health records, and the regions of the cohorts all in one place. I shouldn't forget to say that before I move on to actual numbers and a bit more some findings perhaps and so on, but of course also the cohorts are fully genotyped as well. So there is that, there is genetic information also available. So to cut a long story short, a lot of information. Yes, the surveys are very rich, but there are data beyond the surveys that are linked with the cohorts. For example, something we mentioned, just looking at the view in the Isle of Wight over there and thinking of geography, right? We have geographical linkages. We have area level characteristics on the postcode level or the address level. So rich, very, very rich data. New data in 2 of these cohorts, thinking that this is something about health and inclusive aging, right? And new data, NCDS and DCS-17 will be available towards the end of the year. You can see there the sample sizes that have achieved and our response rates, and we're quite happy about those response rates for these age groups and so on, and also the final sample sizes we have. This data will be made available towards the end of the year. And this data will be made available to the UK Data Service. They're freely available, this data. I know a lot of colleagues know this already, but these data are freely available. With an internet connections and a good research question, an email from Southampton University, log in, have a research question, you download the data. And that, all the survey data are available there. Of course, more sensitive data, specific geographic data, for example, or electronic health records, other linkages, and so on. There is another process, but usually we're pretty fast and so on, and we get the data within a month or 2. But all the survey data, which represents, I think, 80 or 90% of the data, UKDS, and easily download them, and please do so and use the data. Okay, so this is about the data. You may be thinking, okay, George, fine, we have rich data, fine, and so on, but what can we do with this data? And especially since you came all the way to Southampton to talk about health and inclusive aging. What can we do with this data? And I think if there is one slide that maybe stays with you from today's talk, presentation, or whatever, it's this slide probably. It's the, and this is a subset, it's not everything, but I think these are examples of questions which I believe are scientific importance, but are also policy relevant that we can answer, questions related to and the cross-generational life course approach to health and inclusive aging. So, for example, obviously, these are both cohort, the long-term effects of early life circumstances. Yes, they're important for aging type of research as well. We'll give some examples later. You may be thinking, yeah, but early life, what does it matter? It does quite a lot. Of course, the generational cycles in poverty and health, other generational cycles, life course transitions, when they happen or whether they were disrupted, how does this may matter for what happens in later life. This can only be investigated in the cohorts. Intersectional inequalities over the life course. Again, rich data, intersectional inequality across the life course, only available in the cohorts. Something that, okay, I have an interest on this, but quality of life and functioning and productivity post the onset of chronic illness. So, of course, in the cohorts, we do have information prior to the onset, so we can actually understand what drives the onset of chronic illness, but it's very important for information post the onset of chronic illness. So we want to ensure that, and this becomes about inclusive aging, we want to ensure that everybody participates in society, they're productive, they have great quality of life, and so on. I think this is a very important area that the cohorts can actually do in the development of data. This speaks, of course, to the idea of the health span versus the lifespan, which is very important in demography and gerontology and so on. The cohorts, usually when people think of the cohorts, they don't think about the health span and the lifespan, but yes, you can investigate this in actually quite possibly in the best possible way with the British cohorts, because of the data we have before and after the onset of illness and mortality, which of course we have. Resilience and reversibility, not identical constructs, related. Yes, again, whatever happens early on in some specific life stage doesn't have a deterministic impact on what happens later on in life. We can investigate what factors drive resilience, which is quite important, and reversibility, also in later life. One of my favorite topics, the changing experience of different generations. Very important topic, I believe, and also something that has various implications of various types of research we may want to do. And of course, something that, again, it's not something that researchers usually link with the cohorts, but we can also investigate the impact of external shocks, like the pandemic, the cost of living crisis, and so on. And that can also be done pretty well within a single cohort, but within a series of cohorts as well. These are some examples of research questions that I think are of scientific importance, but also policy relevant as well, where because of the design of the data and the series of cohorts, you can apply the cross-generational life course approach. Okay. However, the richness of the cohorts has implications for the quality of the science we can do, and that's vastly important to me, and I think it should be vastly important. The richness of the cohorts can help us, if used appropriately. We have a lot of user guides and information at CLS. I will show you some of that shortly. The richness of the cohorts can, these are two examples, there is more, can help with two things. First of all, with causal inference, vastly important, and with missing data handling. Causal inference. First of all, the richness of the cohorts and the availability of life course rich data from early on and so on can help us to adjust models, rich multivariable adjustment. You can do it in any way you want to do it, to make the no-mutant variables or residual confounding assumption more plausible. That is very important. And that, to me, actually is the central estimate, should be the central estimate in cohorts, place we begin to start on, because that's the average treatment effect, really, of the population average. Well, in most applications of interest, not all, of course. And it's not only that, because of the richness of the data, you can explore for potential negative controls, negative control designs, to be, to further test the assumption of no residual confounding. Rich data, you may want to find instrumental variables. There are potential issues there for potential to find instrumental variables. To cut a long story short, the richness of the cohorts help with making the assumptions for causal inference a bit more reasonable. Of course, it's observational data. We always, no matter the method, need to make some assumption about something unobservable, no matter what we do. But not all observational data are the same. This data allow, because of the richness, when appropriately used, to make those assumptions with either of those methods, ideally with a combination, triangulation, and so on, to make those assumptions a bit more plausible. Very importantly, missing data. Availability of the rich life course data allow us to handle missing data appropriately and restore sample representativeness, which is vastly important. Representativeness, I know I'm facing perhaps a converted here, but representativeness is vastly important. and of course knowing which target population we represent, also vastly important. These cohorts have very well-known statistical properties. That's one of the great things about it. Now, you may be thinking, okay, George, great cohorts and so on, but these are very long-running studies. And when it comes to aging, maybe, you know, are they actually, is there any survival bias in the data, right? Is there any survival bias? Or then again, even beyond that, are they just these guys, just the healthy survivors? And what can we do about that? Well, we have a handling missing data section of the website. There is a webinar on the 6th of June if you want to join, right? We've been doing quite a lot of those. This is one of our papers. If you want to read one paper for our approach on survival bias, on missing data and so on, there's more. I would go for this one because all the theory and the applications are there. But I will give you two examples of where we want to substantially find, because I think it's very important, especially when we're thinking about aging and we're thinking about the future as well. Because we never want to stop collecting data. We want to collect data from these cohorts when they are 90. This is an unprecedented resource. Harvard makes a big deal out of 700 people, right? Okay, and we have these cohorts in the UK. We should never stop collecting data, and we should never stop collecting data for various reasons. But one important reason is this. That's my favorite figure ever, favorite graph ever. You may be seeing this, what's his problem, right? Why is this favorite thing? What is this thing? Let me explain why this is my most favorite thing. So, the black line is mortality rates in England and Wales, for those born 1958, and the gray lines and the confidence intervals is the mortality rate in NCDS, 1958. What you see there is that the mortality rate in NCDS very closely resembles the mortality rate in England and Wales, the population, which means this cohort is not a cohort, it's not a cohort of survivors. We don't have survival bias. We have the exact mortality rate that we expect in the population, very vastly important. So those numbers are also have some interesting implications on how we define the target population. Also, for the certain methodologists in the room, maybe indirect evidence for against panel conditioning. Various implications, that's the one. So, but I think this is vastly important, the fact that, and that has been also observed in the 1946 cohort as well. Generally, the idea that the mortality rates in the cohort represent also the population is very important for various reasons, but importantly for when we want to analyze data across the life course and in later life. We wouldn't want to be analyzing a sample of that has a lot of survival bias. There are ways, of course, to mitigate this, but it's great that these mortality rates resemble what happened to the population. However, you'll be thinking, okay, great that the mortality rates happen to be that, fantastic, but still, maybe, you know, the cohorts that because of selective attrition, you know, they're a bit healthier than the counterparts in the population. Well, and that's a missing data problem, right? That's a missing data problem. That's a loss, you know, selective attrition problem. So this is long-term limiting illness at age 55. This is estimate without confidence intervals from the ONS longitudinal study, an external benchmark, from colleagues, from a paper from colleagues external to CLS, not related to CLS. That's the point estimate, so it's about 22%. This is a point estimate to make the ONS estimate directly comparable to NCDS. So excluding respondents who are MDK after age 16. But you see there, not much difference there. And this is the point estimate of about 8,107 NCDS participants at age 55. And yes, you see some difference there. It's about 19.5%. So yes, less prevalence of long-standing illness. They're a bit healthier. Great. This is where we come in and we say, okay, fine. But we have so much rich survey data. Let's use this data and try to make the sample to restore sample representativeness. So first, what we do, we replicate this point estimate and add some confidence intervals. By the way, if those confidence intervals seem wide, it's because the scale varies from 18% to 24. If you go from 0 to 100, they will look much more powerful, right? Those confidence intervals, they're not that wide. So we do this, and the question is, if we do in this case multiple imputation, bringing in rich information appropriately in the imputation, as based on the work we have done on NCDS. And we focus on the target population of age 55, which is those alive and residing in Britain. Can we replicate the external benchmark? And the answer is yes, we can. Yes, we can. There are more examples like this on external benchmarks on education and so on. There are more examples on other cohorts too, how we can replicate the baseline sample. So, to cut a long story short, these samples have great properties and with appropriate handling, in this case of selective attrition, they're very relevant for research on aging and so on. But it just has to be that we have to use the rich information appropriately. All right. Let's move on to some examples of findings, because it's Friday afternoon. Okay, oh my God, data, methods. Come on, George, something more exciting. Okay, safety. I will start from early life. I know I want to talk about on the outline. I have the generational health drift, but before I move into that, I would say something about early life. One very robust finding from the cohorts is that, of course, early life matters. Lots of theory on that from various disciplines. The hard empirical evidence how early life matters comes from the British cohorts. What are the factors in early life that matter? Obviously, or maybe not so obviously, but early life socioeconomic position. The socioeconomic circumstances of the families matter quite a lot. We know this, and they matter 50 or 60 years later. And these characteristics of socioeconomic, and the cohorts are very, even back then, were very rich in indicators of socioeconomic position, including social class, income, parental education, housing tenure, amenities, and so on. So no matter how you look at it, early life socioeconomic circumstances do matter and shape social health and economic outcomes later on. They not only shape what happens in our lifetime, they also shape how long we live. And I will give an example from another area, which is another very robust finding across generations, across the cohorts. Early life mental health matters quite a lot. Early life mental health in itself is very socially patterned, but early life mental health has been shown across generations to have an impact, and I'm using causal language on purpose here, we can discuss the assumptions there, on social, economic, and health outcomes later on. In this paper, we have used some biomarkers to showcase the impact on health, but it also affects how long we live, which is the most important form of inequality. How long we live, let alone what happens in those years we live, how long we live. So this is, very simply the adjusted survival, very, very, very adjusted survival probabilities of survival for groups, because of the richness of the 1958 British cohort. We have like at age 7, 11, and 16 measures of mental health. We derived four longitudinal groups. The blue line is low, stable, low, no mental health issues or problems. Adolescent onset, the red line, onset in adolescence at 16. Moderate mental health symptoms, and stable high, the orange line, those with the mental health, the highest mental health symptoms at age from age 7 to age 16. You can see there that the probability of survival is very patterned by mental health status. And this is a very vital, fundamental inequality. It's not only what happens in a lifetime, it's also how long we live. By the way, you can get similar patterns with socioeconomic position. The more disadvantaged, those from families with more disadvantaged socioeconomic position do live less, but there's a double whammy, if I may say so, of inequality. Not only worse mental health or more disadvantaged socioeconomic position leads to less years of life lived, it also leads to more years in poor health, which might seem counterintuitive to begin with, but this is what we observe in the cohorts and elsewhere, which I think has many implications for the healthcare system, the labor market, society, for people's lives, and so on. Okay. Of course, mental health, the cohorts, one of the great strengths of the cohorts, among the many other things that we observe over the life course, is that we observe mental health over the life course, right? And this is a paper that was actually one of the first papers where BCS-70, NCDS, and NSAID, the three older cohorts, were above the age 50. So, where all the famous studies of aging start, right? Like Elsa share all these great, fantastic studies. So this is, I'm using this example to showcase a little bit of how the fact that we have all this refined information across the life course can help us understand shocks, in this case, a pandemic. By the way, the tigers have nothing to do with the paper, right? I keep them there on that slide on purpose of the Guardian because I want to soften the blow. The second real-life crisis, right? It's a bit strong, isn't it? But actually, the Guardian got it right in this case. Because, so what do we have here? 3 lines there. This is psychological distress, calendar year, because in order to capture where the pandemic happened. 3 cohorts, the blue line, the Cambridge light blue line are baby boomers born in 1946, the oldest cohort. The green line are the 1958 British cohort, so baby boomers born in 1958. And the orange line, Generation X, born in 1970. 3 things there. I think there are 3 messages there. 2 before we get into the pandemic. First of all, that if you notice, Generation X have worse mental health. And of course, this calendar year, but then I have another plot later on, age adjusted. That's something that I will mention a bit more later about how this is part of the generation. But the pandemic happens and you see a spike. Psychological distress increases. Now, the fact that we have 3 generations, 3 cohorts at different ages, and something happens at the same period, allows us to actually say, look, we can theorize a little bit about APC, age period cohort effects, without doing any modeling assumptions. And saying, look, it's not a cohort effect because it happens in all these cohorts, it's not age, doesn't happen at the same age, probably it's a period effect. And actually happened exactly neatly when the pandemic happened. So probably pandemic influenced people's mental health and there was a spike and so on. And I think within this paper was important. I mean, there was a lot of focus on early life mental health with the pandemic. Yes, it was affected, very important, but mental it wasn't only about early life, adolescence, and so on. There was an impact across the age range. We showcase this there. And of course, we can only say that this is a period effect, and we are not there. So assumptions because actually of the nature of the data we have. Okay. Moving on to something, there could have been other various examples, but something I wanted to showcase, present this as the generational health drift. This is an infographic, which we try to summarize a lot of work we have been doing in the cohorts and other data sets, creating pseudo cohorts and so on, and comparing the health of generations at the same age. What we find repeatedly, and after a lot of methodological work, and comparing data from self-reports, biomarkers, and a lot of methodological work on measurement across generations, is that at the same age, younger generations have worse health outcomes. And these are some examples: mental health, diabetes, obesity, social mental health, morbidity, and more. We have a schematic review that is happening as we speak in the cohorts. I have the slides with me. But, I was only given 40-45 minutes, right, not 3 hours. So I'll try to stick to that. They are very, well, with the exception of high, which also has changed later on recently. There isn't any health outcome in the cohorts where things are actually improving. There are some health outcomes that are very similar levels across generations, but a lot of it on the red, which means actually worse health outcomes at the same age. Now, this has implications, but before I get into the implications and possible antecedents and consequences, the cohorts, the Bridgeport cohorts and the series of Bridgeport cohorts can offer us a lot of insights on this. And perhaps the most robust evidence about, first, to document this as a trend, and second, and more than that, to understand its antecedents and also, importantly, also consequences. So, a little bit of, not a lot of theory, but I think it's important to visualize a little bit what this means across the life course and why having a lot of generations quite helps. Okay, so this is the very well-known distribution of risk, said Jeffrey Rose, right? Let's say that's the age of onset of a chronic illness, I don't know, whatever, diabetes. What we really want to do, we want to do this. We want to press the distribution of risk later in life. Actually, what we want to do is this. We want to compress the distribution of risk later in life. We want, a lot of colleagues in the room, maybe everyone in the room knows, okay, we want to compress morbidity, right? Obviously, that's the goal, compress morbidity. And if without compressing morbidity or reducing the years spent in poor health, we will not be able to achieve healthy longevity, healthy aging, and inclusive aging in the 21st century. Now, the generational health drift implies this, that the distribution of risk is shifting to earlier stages in life. That's the implication. That's what it means. So this perspective of the distribution of risk. And with all the outcomes, all the health outcomes I mentioned, this is what we find in the cohort. Some examples: obesity epidemic. This is 5 different cohorts. You will see that the more recently important cohorts, and with the millennium cohort and ALSPAC, which is a regional cohort in Bristol, early on in life, high rates of obesity. What is also interesting is that Generation X, the divergence, the red line, this is 70 starts at age 16. Just by plotting this, which of course this is like bringing together various cohorts, harmonizing data, and it's a lot of work, but having this curves, either kids and the models, whatever, you can smooth those curves. That's not the important thing here. The important thing is that by just by plotting this, you can have some understanding about the obesity epidemic. Which generations, when it started happening, perhaps, which generations, for example, early on, there wasn't much difference between Generation X and baby boomers. It started diverging at age 16, but definitely for millennials and Gen Z, it's much, much worse, even early on in life. So that gives us some ideas about what is going on. It's not just about obesity. This is diabetes. Ever having diabetes in the 3 cohorts, 1946, NSHD, BC7 in 1970, and NCDS, early and late baby boomers and Generation X, the prevalence of diabetes always higher in the younger in the more recently born cohort. And you will see that the divergence there starts from midlife onwards, certainly. We have a lot of work around midlife and before, and we know that the divergence in chronic health between Generation X and baby boomers starts in midlife, certainly. Okay, what about mental health? This is mental health at age 16, emotional problems, 4 different generations. Again, cohorts, a lot of methodological work there to make those things comparable. A lot of work happening on this, and you can see that it's a millennium cohort, Gen Z at age 16, where actually divergence happens, where we have worse mental health. That wasn't visible compared to millennials, Generation X, and baby boomers. So that gives us some idea of when this might have happened. Interestingly, what I find very interesting, when we look at psychological distress over the life course, but plotting age, not calendar year, this is an equivalent plot of the previous one I have shown of the 3 generations, 1946, 1958, 1970. At the same age, of course, you see Generation X, the blue line, worse psychological distress at the same age. But you will see that, in fact, there it is. Here, Generation X and baby boomers at age 16, there was no difference. But when we move to age 24, 25, there is a difference. So something happened there. So just by doing descriptive work in this case, but of course, work that takes a lot of time, first to collect this data, but also to make sure that these things are comparable and so on. That can give us a lot of ideas about, okay, when did this thing happen? When did divergence of mental health start between Generation X and baby boomers? Between 16 and 24, and then it stays there across the latest data that we have. Another thing you may notice, that's it, is that midlife is a peak distress period, and the most robust evidence about midlife being high distress about the distress period comes again from the cohorts because of the data we happen to have. Because this is not biased, let's say you do this by age and some other data, you may be confounding cohort age and period effects. In this case, we don't, right? Because of the design of the surveys. Okay, before I move on to some of the consequences and wrap up with some discussion of health inequalities and have some time for questions as well. Just to say, of course, the generational health drift has various implications for labor market, healthcare system, and so on. But the common cause out of this is that depending on what happens in life expectancy, and I'll get to that soon, the implications may lead to expansion of morbidity, so more years spent in poor health, not good. This is not what we want. This is not how we achieve healthy longevity in the 21st century and beyond. And of course, obviously, if life expectancy stops increasing or declines, that's even worse outcome, of course, right? If you have a life loss and so on. Having said all that, this life expectancy in the UK, the dotted line is the very well stagnation of life expectancy before the pandemic dip, and then the projections are that life expectancy will continue to increase. If this is the case, and when we don't reverse or stop somehow the generation of health drift, we're heading for expansion of mobility. That's it. Obviously, we could debate about what will happen if these projections will be the case, but these are the projections we speak. And if this remains the case, we're heading for expansion. That's an implication of the generation of health drift. Not good. But it's not my last slide. Not yet, maybe soon. But that's a kind of a prediction, right? I know this is recorded, so to make a prediction, right, about life expectancy. And so, I think there are some consequences of the generation of health drift, which it doesn't deserve the attention I think it should deserve it. But things start getting attention once they hit the economy, right? And you may have heard about, things like the Great Resignation, and of course how, for example, long-standing illness impacts economic activity, and you have more people out of work because of poor health. Okay, of course, in the cohorts we do have information on employment histories across the lifetime. This is men by age 65. This is women. There's some difference there between part-time and full-time working, caring responsibilities, and so on, another form of inequality. But having all this information on employment histories and health, and also of vast importance, I believe, all this other information that from early on in life we can control whatever estimate we're richly control whatever estimate we're getting. We're doing some work out with this very hot off the press work. We're doing this work with the advanced analytics team of NHS England. This is BCS 70, and this is various long-standing illness and various chronic obesity, diabetes, various chronic conditions at age 42. And we're looking at the risk ratio, whether they increase the risk of being inactive due to health 4 years later. Just 4 years, not a long time. Now, why the cohorts are graded? Because we have all this refined information on chronic illness. We have employment, so at the same time as the exposure, we control for employment, for activity. In econometrics lingo for the economists in the room, this is a lagged outcome model. And we can bring in all the rich early life controls. This is important. Obviously, we cannot randomize chronic illness. We cannot do it, and it's not feasible, it would be unethical, obviously. So the best bet we can have is with rich observational data to get something close to something that we can say, look, we have some assumptions, but this is what we adjust for, and this is what we find. What you will see, we replicate the known finding of other studies on long-standing illness, yes, a risk ratio of more than 4, and so on. But we know that this is mostly because of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, back pain, and psychological distress. Really. We'll be doing more work on that when the new data for this is will be available, not yet. But we think this is one manifestation of the generational health drift. The distribution of risk slides further down, further earlier in life. This is midlife, this is age 42. And what happens 4 years later? Obviously, with much higher prevalence of those things a bit later on, at age 55, 60, and so on, the projection, if you want to make a simple linear projection, can be much worse and so on. But that's a consequence of the generational health drift. I will finish today's edging towards the end of today's presentation, but I couldn't present something without mentioning something about health inequalities. Now, of course, these things are important, right? I think obviously health inequalities are important. There are a lot of policy. UK state pension rates might soon rise. That will create a lot of inequality if it does, but okay, it's a policy. We need better income, we have cost of living crisis, and so on. Okay, so health inequalities, I think health inequalities are a necessary condition to reduce them or eliminate them. There's a moral case to eliminate them. But it's a necessary condition in order to achieve healthy and inclusive aging in the 21st century. Now, there's a lot of work highlighting inequalities in the older population in later life as we speak. From ELSA, these are some examples, ELSA share, and so on, and everything, which is great. However, inequalities in later life do not appear magically. They're a function of what happens over the life course. This is one example of income over the life course. And you can see how inequality manifests. From age 23, the spread was in the 10th century in the 90s, in the median, and then how that inequality increases. That's one example, right? There are many more in the cohorts of how inequality plays out and so on. So, I will quickly give you 2 examples of how inequality matters in midlife and early on, and because I think it's something that we need to focus, especially if we don't reverse the generational drift, because in 20 or 30 years we will have this inequality where disadvantaged groups in the population will be living less, but also spending more years in poor health. And that is unacceptable anyway, but we can avoid this. Now, this is a paper we have been doing with BCS-70 in midlife, comparing Britain, this is an example of Britain, and the US. International comparisons, which is another thing that the cohorts can do really well when data are available, and they can be very useful. We focus on midlife. Midlife, you know, it's an important time in life. It's overlooked sometimes in favor of early or later life. When it comes to health and health inequality, it's application to health in later life, in a time when maybe clinical signals start to emerge. What we do, we compare BCS-70 with that health, a study from the US, it is of its own. We use the rich biomarkers available in both surveys, also self-reported measures as well. The biomarkers in midlife are important because even if, let's say, you want to use electronic health records, somebody has to have access, has to have, been in contact with the healthcare system in order to have a record there. With biomarkers, you have a population metric, and you have also preclinical undiagnosed information as well, which is quite important for population science. Okay, what we have found? Compared to the USA, USA is blue, Britain is red. Compared to the USA, adults in Britain are more likely to be regular smokers, be heavy drinkers, and rate their health as poor. My prediction for health, this is like health behavior, was, even before I saw this, that actually the well-known gap between Britain and US, where Britain is doing better, because Generation X have worse health compared to baby boomers, and this evidence from previous work was on baby boomers, that actually this gap would have narrowed down. No, actually, in the US, worse levels of obesity, cholesterol, high blood pressure, and so on. What drives those things, and why inequality is important, and why we should avoid making inequality worse, but we should actually reduce inequality, is that all of this, a lot of this is driven by inequality. This is obesity by income tertile. You see the widespread in the US, blue. There is inequality that we should reduce in the UK, in Britain, but less. Ditto for income level, for cholesterol, for high cholesterol and hypertension, when we look at parental education, own education, and income level. The message here is, inequality does matter, and it's something that matters not only when we think of aging and inequality in later life, it matters in midlife because that is application for what happens later on. I will finish by just highlighting some results, because inequality, there are stark inequalities as we speak in early life. This is some work we did for the Deaton review using the Millennium cohort. This is cognitive function, cognitive development at age 3, stratified by various characteristics. You will see there is a story of divergent destinies. For example, if you look at income, those in the poorest quintile and those in the richest quintile, and so on. So very strong inequalities there. Very recent paper looking at income and clustering of various health and educational outcomes and how disadvantage might shape those. This is the Millennium cohort. Income is on the x-axis, and this is like each of those outcomes in its own, or clustering grouping those outcomes. You will see the stark disadvantage. Now, there is inequality between generations. This is mostly what you see in the media, but there is inequality within generations, and there is stark evidence that inequality within generations is rising in most different cohorts, and that may have a very strong role for what happens later on. Okay, that's my last slide. I will finish by saying population aging is a dominant trend in the 21st century. It will not go away. The birth cohorts have a very important role to play in understanding process of aging and doing policy relevant research in order to ensure that we will achieve health and longevity in the 21st century and beyond. Thank you so much.